Welcome back to round 4 racing action from the Inland Off-Road Championship Racing Series for 2019. Brought to you by 4x4 Mega World, and on point, 4x4 Mega World's flying Jason Fenter and Jaco van Aert would be the crew to open up the track on the 35-kilometer run. First to go through the big splashes as well, showing how testing it's going to be, especially for the open cabs that's in the special vehicles. For the production vehicles, they would have a nice clean run, but a 35-kilometer track was going to give us extremely tight times, and it was fast and flowing, expecting the times to be between 20 and 30 minutes. Approximately the winning time would be around the 25 to 26 minute marker. Fenter went on to record an absolute banger and go pole. Dylan Fenter and Donovan Lover coming off their best ever finish at the Mafeking round. They were on the wheel of their older brother, and we're going to try and climb the ladder once again. A few wrong slots in the prologue, not really battling with the dust as the gaps were quite handy, but just trying to get themselves into that morning warm-up. They would record a very respectable time to get themselves inside of the top 20, but they'd expected a higher run, eventually finishing 13th overall, meaning it was going to be a challenge come race time. They were going to be in the dust of 12 warriors up the road from them. Jacques Van Tonderen and Sammy Redlingace, who have been plagued by a couple of dodgy mechanical issues in the early part of the season. The T5 Road to Dakar Ford Ranger was in good form at this event, and they were in full attack mode. Around about the halfway marker of the prologue, they actually caught up to the dust of Dylan Lubber up the road from them. That caused them to slow their pace, but they still recorded a respectable top 10 time, just making it into single digits, 9th on the road for them. They were the first crew to get a taste of what the afternoon Dust Bowl session would be. Mechanicals late on in the day at the Mafeking event held back Janne and Peter Visser from what would be an outstanding event for them. The S2 was very wary. The reason they were wary is they lost communication, they lost comms inside the car, and that was going to cause them to drop way down the order. Watch for them to do the big fight back once again. They're famous for those come from behind drives, now qualifying in a 14th position. Stefan Van Pletsen, after missing the last event, the Mafeking 250, and they were just going to have to try and figure out how the track was going to be running. The early track was not a problem for them, but after the early river crossings, a wrong slot cost them big time, but they still qualified high at the sharp end of the field. 8th position for them, and the first of the special open wheelers. Ernst Roberts and Henry Kerner, a very classy setup as well. They've podiumed nationally, and they've been bringing home some solid finishes in the Inland Off-Road Championship brought to you by 4x4 Mega World. A rollover at the national event meant there was a couple of new body panels on the Nissan Navara, and cautious was the roll of the day in the early running. Still though, they were able to go second fastest, meaning they were a massive threat going forward into the main event. Just 9 seconds of pole setters, Jason Fenter and Jaco van Aert. Force Prinsloo and Kenneth Venter have been really coming to terms with the Ford at the latter half of 2018 and the beginning of 2019. They've become a bit of a team to beat. This time around though, problems on the GPS beat them out, which meant they made a couple of small errors. They were still fast enough though to qualify 6th overall. Again, another big threat for the overall, showing how tight times were. In fact, at this stage, the top 5 were separated by less than a minute. Recall this pair, or certainly this vehicle, the Giant Killers, the P17 of Willem de Tooy, now joined on navvies by Leonard Kramer. Kramer's got a good fielding as well after a couple of years of being in the chair with Brian Baragwanath. Unfortunately, luck wasn't on their side. Only 4Ks in, a broken rim came out. They had to do a big change. They lost 6 minutes, and that put them 3rd in Class P. It would be another stellar come from behind drive if they could hold it all together. Hang on to your hats. That was going to be a crew to watch in the main race. Lawrence Boyson and Rickers Hutting were going to be sharing the cab for the day, racing in the open wheeler category. Fuel starvation problems this time around plagued their qualifying run, sending them way down the order. The A30 was going to be starting almost way at the back of the pack, making it a very challenging day going forward. The first challenge was to fish out all of the foam that had caused the starvation problems that took them most of the time between the prologue and the main race. Kobus Marie and Craig Galvin, the A11, had a fairly clean run. They didn't lose too much time in the qualifier, They went second fastest in the Class A's, and that slotted them into a nice, comfortable top 10 overall. They were in a strong position for the afternoon's event. Remember, 49 cars made up the full queue. The first of the many and the record entry for the G-Class side-by-sides. And it's only right that Werner and Leon Mostert were going to be opening up the track. They would try and qualify inside of a top 10. They lost a little bit of time getting wrong slotted. That put them way down the order in 24th place overall. And they were going to be in a massive fight to try and get onto the box for the G-Class and try and make their way up the road. Marcus Labuschagne and Neil Putter in the G11. Also wrong slots in the prologue. It seemed that everyone sitting outside the top 10 was starting to get into the dust, maybe pushing a little bit too hard and making those tiny little errors that you were punished for severely in the short 35-kilometer prologue run. The G11, not punished too hard though, 12th in the lineup queue. For Philip de Vries and Xander de Vries, the G4 had an economic run. Top 5 though showed that they were going to be overall key players. The sprint laps very much falling into the hands of the G-Class. They can really carry a lot of corner speed and fire themselves out of the tight turns. Top 5 for the side-by-sides, a very strong run. But they'd all be chasing down on the G21 of Vickers Haasbroek and Jurgen Smith. An incredible run, 4th fastest overall, just 44 seconds at the end of play off the pole setter Jason Venter and Jacco van Aert. This was going to set them up very nicely, but they would be in a straight dogfight with only 3 seconds between themselves and the de Vries pairing. Next up would be Jerry van der Bijl and Tiaan Swart jumping in to do navigation notes. 21st place put them almost smack bang in the middle of the pack. They'd have a fun and busy day, racking up the mileage, getting themselves ready for certainly Jerry's charge on Dakar 2020. Seems to be talking about the side-by-side so much, and get ready, there's more to come as well with a massive entry coming in. Francois van der Walt and Gerry Prinsloo in the D33 spent a lot of time rebuilding this car after a string of mechanicals and DNFs have forced them almost to the back of the pack. This time around they went almost all the way to the top, 3rd overall and fastest in Class D. Francois Smit was back in racing action after a broken wrist forced him out at the beginning of the season. The car and himself had some TLC. Ferdy Petersen was going to be on the notes, trying to get them up the order. They qualified well, 11th overall and 1st of the Class Ps. That was going to be an important position as well. You certainly didn't want to be sucking too much dust in the early laps, and they were going to be setting off with a good margin. At this stage, they wouldn't know about Willem de Tooy and his issues. For them, it was all about just keeping the focus going forwards. Whatever happened behind them was someone else's problem. Dave Huddy was going to be joining us for this round of our Regional Championship Racing Series, joined by good buddy and an excellent driver and navigator to boot. Rod Cook was going to be on the notes. A strong qualifying, placing them 7th overall, and they were going to be also looking for the giant killer Mantra to see if they can beat out some of those international spec and Class T race cars up the road. In the D category, Lawrence Van Veek and Marnie Roux did a solid job. They got themselves inside of a top 20 overall, 17th, but more importantly, they were 2 minutes 53 seconds off the fastest Class Ds, Francois van der Walt and Gerry Prinsloo. That was the key factor there, a massive gap and differential to try and make up come the main race. Tony and Mike Gavea, after qualifying outside the top 20 at the previous event, started to figure out how to get the pace going early in the morning in the prologues. The P51 did a good enough job to get themselves up there this time. 15th overall would stand them in good stead. Again, out-qualifying some of their arch rivals, but they needed to catch up to the back end of a very fast and tasty-looking Francois Smit and Ferdy Petersen. They were 2nd in class at this point. For Dion Boyens and Jacques Leroux, not a great qualifier. They were going to be outside the top 30. In fact, way down in 37th position. GPS problems for them caused them the issues. It sounds like Dion was joking. He said Jacques hadn't seen so many nice mealie fields in a while. I think he got a bit distracted. He'll have to focus in hard though, come race time. A really nice result for the S-Class coming in from Pete and Benjamin Kotze. they qualified very solid in a top 16. So clearly no issues for them, even though they said they did catch up to a little bit of dust, but the gap was just enough that they could still have a good buffer and still keep on pushing. The ultra important top 20 was what everyone was after, and it was clear that the sprint version of this time trial was going to make things super tasty in the afternoon session. Tions du Toit and James O'Mahony in the D11 also top 20'd it. They're becoming very tasty. Gotta love the setup on the Land Cruiser. 19th overall in the queue. And again, they would be chasing down to see how close they could get, on time that is, to Francois van der Walt and Ferry Prinsloo. Dust was their problem, but in the early stages, it was their own dust and no one else's. Hein Kruger and Paul Moret reported no issues in the time trial, and the D25 put in a respectable run, 22nd, but that meant in race time they were going to be surrounded by a ton of very fast side-by-sides. Jerry van der Bijl was up the road, behind them was the T29 of Johan Strauss, and just after that, Aki Kruger and Werner Mostert. It was going to be busy on lap number 1 come race time for the D25 pairing of Hein Kruger and Paul Moret. For Stain Villiers and Richard Carey, no whizzing and popping, and certainly no belching of black smoke. Stepping out of the production vehicle turbo diesel, the first time we've seen them racing in anger in the Class A Zarco, moving out of the Ford Ranger. They suffered, unfortunately, some terminal mechanical issues quite early on in the race. These will be the last shots we saw of them. Hopefully, they'll be coming back racing with us for the next round at Bloemfontein. For Johan Strauss and Alzan Fenter, the T29, we know it's a super fast car. They've been starting to really come to terms with the single cab Toyota Hilux, and again a top 25 position was going to set them up quite nicely. The T29 bagging an emphatic 29th slot for the main race. Sorel and Jaco Oosthuizen in the D111, no issues on their time trial as well. And again, the Land Rover starting to bring in very consistent finishes the whole way through 2019 season. 31st for Sorel and Jaco. They said they're more about the long distance laps. 35 is a little bit too sprinty for their liking. For Weishalt and Erasmus, a nice charge once again. 28th place, the fastest of the modern shapes of the Land Cruisers. Running great pace, trying to crack their way into a top 3 placing again in what is becoming the ultra-competitive production vehicle Class Ds. The track was starting to chew up by this stage, as more than half of the field had already been through, churning up the dust and moving all those important rocks at the bottom of the riverbeds out the way. The cars were starting to go deeper and fly higher on the kickers. For Alex and Alan Van Rooyen in the D77, a loss of 10 minutes and 31 seconds would see them some of the final finishes in the prologue. Quite a few teams, unfortunately, recording DNFs this time around. 41st place would mean a ton of dust, certainly in the early kilometers of loop number 1. Great to have Dirval van Bedra and Johan du Toit getting the job done, making up our massive entry from our G-Class side-by-sides. Not too bad a run. A loss of 7 minutes and 18 seconds put them outside the top 30. They would line up for the main show. 34th overall, trying to chase them way up into the top 5. That was their goal coming into this event. For Glenn Theron and Gerrit Skitter in the G110, this was going to be a big story. Glenn, another driver jumping out of the Class T Ford Rangers, this time into the much more fun side-by-sides. Not used to these dimensions, smashed a bit of a rock, picked up a puncher, and lost a bit of time out there. They'd also be having to pick up their pieces of their race from the back of the pack, starting in 43rd place. Ronnie Burtis, haven't seen him racing for a long time. Big Ron was back into the seats with Etienne Fenter in the G444. They qualified just inside the top 40, making the three-quarter cut. 38th for them on the road. The G97, we're going to have some fun out there in the LCP roofing colours. Big Andre Pretorius was going to be on the wheel with multiple off-road national bike champion Lawrence Mahoney on the notes. And it would be notes and hand signals the whole way through the day. This car not running a comm system. It was going to be hands flying and a lot of shouting. They'd have some fun. Dirk Putter and Henny Hutting in the E4, also on a bit of a flyback, running some new colours. green sky on the side of their car for 2019. The E4 would try and claw their way inside of a top half of the field, eventually getting a nice solid number 27 in the queue for Putter and Hutting. Almost on the knuckle of the halfway field. For Andre Geldenhuys and Victor Fincham, almost faultless run in the E1. They always come with a very well-prepped machine. Just two small little overshoots, but they qualified well, second in Class E's. That put them in the respectable number of 26 in the queue. The Class E's certainly not set up perfectly for the 37k sprint. Much more about the long game come the afternoon session. With still crews out there, Ernst Roberts was home and celebrating early with his incredible number 2 finish in the prologue. We're happy for you, Ernst. Now go get ready for the race. Bernard and Minette Johnston in the T22. We're in the thick of it as well. The T class, such a tough one to call and such a tough one to go out and race. The Johnstons did an incredible job catching a lot of other crews out by qualifying high in an 18th overall. The D16, we were looking to see if that old magic was going to be coming back at round number 4. After a ton of problems, this time around, it was a nice number. 20th fastest in the overall queue and a nice position in the Class D16s for Regan Austin and Warren Foss. That had them 20 seconds behind the D11. The race was on. No problems for Aki and Jandre Kruger, even though the car sounded a little bit cold when they set off out into their prologue. They still did enough to qualify first in Class E. That's a nice job. Love to see the E7s running numbers, and incredibly enough, they made their way into the top half of the field. They'd line up in the queue, 24th. Gotta love the E classes. They just never quit. A stall at the start for Rudolf de Toy and Ben Sutherland. That would lose them a ton of time. They'd have to move out of their slot in the queue. That meant no matter what, they were going to be at least a couple of minutes down. Same B100, same orange color, a different car this time around. It's a Marco, getting driven now by Sifu van Skalkwyk and Arthur Croshaw. We'd expect the same results and same speed though to come in. They lost a ton of time in the prologue though. And as many other crews suffered the same fate, the 35-kilometer loop punishing hard outside the top 40 for the B100. For Ignis Duplessis and Joan Vermaak trying to get the Isuzu name up there, and they did just that. The E18 had a very nice run, 37th overall for them, and they are becoming a very consistent and polished pairing, bringing home points and places at every single event. It was the Magic 30 for Johan Vierser and Jerry Besson. The E-Class giving us a very strong field. It was going to be tough to call this one, certainly for the minor placings on the podiums. The E-Class would be just looking forward to the slightly longer run in the afternoon session. Remember, after 35 kilometers of the prologue, there remained still 210 Ks out in the saddle. For Nish Albana, our only single-seater in the race, he had to do all of the work on his own-some. He never really pushes super hard in the prologue, likes to save it for the main race, and is all about survival for the B20. He did have a little bit of braking problems on the prologue, but other than that, the B20 came home with a respectable 35th. That would put him in the queue nicely. No notes, no navy, just one man and his car. The F-Class, one of the oldest buckies out there, still rocking and rolling. The indestructible, original Toyota Hilux. The F20 of Jan and Julian Roos. Able to upset quite a few people out there as well, qualifying 36th overall. Very nice run for our oldest category of cars in the queue. They'd be going up against the F88 of the Bertas, Malcolm and Gustav, in the American spec Toyota Hilux. That's why it's got a slightly different looking front end to it. Still, it charges good. We have seen it racing in the past as well. And if she can finish, she runs good. Still takes me a while to get my eye used to the front end of this thing. American Spec Toyota Hilux racing in SA. I'm trying to take out our cameras as well. For Elise Roberts and Jaco Skidder, they've become a very solid pairing as well. And the G7 would be looking to bring home once again rock solid points come the end of the event. They reported no issues on their prologue run, and for this pairing it's all about just bringing home finishes and seat time. Learning the vehicle, learning each other. They'd get faster as the day got longer. One of two ladies coming in, all lady teams, Colleen Croshaw and Marina van Skalkbeek. This was not their day though. A host of mechanical issues in the prologue put paid to their race early on. Sad situation as well, because the B101 is so good at bringing home finishes nearly every single time. So the final remaining pairing was going to be our other lady squad, with Suma Smith and Gabby Peterson getting the job done. A good run in the prologue, no issues, and the P81 would just out-qualify Elise Roberts and Jaco Skidder in their side-by-side. Suma Smith on the wheel, Gabby on the notes, P81, 39th position, come the lineup queue. And that was going to be it from our qualifying run. It just remained to get locked and loaded and ready for 210 kilometers of dusty, wild racing. Here's confirmation and how tight things were coming at the end of the prologue. Just 9 seconds separating Jason Fenter and Jaco van Aert from their closest rivals, Ernst Roberts and Henry Kerner. That was going to be a good dice, but Francois van der Walt and Harry Prinsloo doing an incredible run to get themselves in third overall. The fastest of the open wheelers was 8th fastest, Stefan van Pletzen and Jaco Petersen, just 26 seconds off the fastest qualifier. Jacques van Tonder and Sammy Redlinghuis just behind them would be pushing them hard on the early kilometers. Join us after the break as we still have 210 kilometers of inland off-road championship racing still to come.